Hi Hawks, this is Grandma Marr coming to you on a video. I've missed you all. I hope you're well and doing okay. I talked to Mrs. Hunt about ways that I might still be able to help her out and have some contact with you guys. And she suggested that I could read a story to you and she would send it to all of you. So I'm really happy to have this chance to share a story with you. And I hope you enjoy it. It's a story called Pecos Bill. And Pecos Bill was a cowboy, as you can see. And this is a legend. And you might know already, a legend is a story that's told over and over about how something real exists and how it happened. But the story's not necessarily true. It's just the way we kind of like to tell the story. So that's what I'm going to be sharing with you, the legend of Pecos Bill. And it takes place a while ago. It says there aren't many cowboys these days, not real ones like Pecos Bill. Bill was a piece of work, all right. He was the doggonedest, gall-dingedest, dad-blamedest son of the prairie sod who ever rode across these here United States. Any cowpuncher worth a lick will tell you that if it weren't for Bill, there wouldn't have been a Wild West. It would have been plain old mundane. It took a man like Pecos Bill to conquer the West. Before he came on the scene, cowboys didn't know a thing about cows. And let me tell you, a cowboy who doesn't know about cows is pretty lame. But we're putting our socks on over our boots here, sliding down the hill before we know where the cactus are, getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Because to understand what Bill was about, you've got to know he was half coyote. Bill started out his life just like you and me. He was the youngest of 14 brothers and sisters, and his folks lived smack in the middle of Texas. They were your regular family of prairie settlers, except Bill's father had a powerful fear of getting hemmed in by neighbors. When Bill was only a couple weeks old, his father decided the family was going to move. Some other family had moved in right next door, only 200 miles away. If it's one thing I can't stand, said Bill's father, it's being cramped by squatters. Now here's Bill's family with his daddy on the end and coming all the way down, all those brothers and sisters, and this little peewee guy here, that's little baby Bill. So Bill's family piled into their wagon and headed west. They traveled for 2 weeks when, quite by accident, little Bill squirted out the back. Since pioneers were too busy pioneering all the time, Bill's parents didn't realize he was gone until they took a head count 3 weeks later. By that time, they decided to chalk up the loss of their youngest son to experience, and they didn't even bother to go back to find the little devil. So there was poor Bill, a mere babe, all alone on the range. His parents and his brothers and his sisters were gone forever. Pecos Bill's prospects looked mighty slim. But luckily, the first critter to happen upon Bill was a coyote. Like all coyotes, this one had a soft spot for young'uns, so she took him to her den. There, Bill grew up just like a coyote, a darn good one, too. Young Bill learned to run across the plains, kicking up clouds of dust faster than a jackrabbit. He was so fast he could outrun the deer. Mostly, he played fair with the other coyotes, but sometimes he did take advantage of them. He was especially good at the sing-alongs at night, when all the coyotes would go up on the ridge and howl at the moon. There was no end to the fun Bill had growing up with the coyotes. That was the life. Bill was a coyote. Bill was a coyote through and through, born to be wild. And here he is with his coyote mom. She's smiling and he's holding a bone. And here he is howling with his friends and his brothers and sisters at the moon at night. One day, Bill was scouting down by the Pecos River looking for his coyote buddies when he came across the strangest creature. Mind you, Bill had never seen a cowboy before. So Bill sidled up to the cowboy coyote stile and investigated. Bill had never seen anything like this sorry dude before. The cowboy couldn't believe his eyes either, because as you can imagine, Bill was quite a sight for the stranger to behold. He looked down at Bill from his horse and said, "You're as naked as a jaybird, partner. What in tarnation are you running around without your clothes? Did you lose them in a poker game or something?" "What do you mean naked?" Bill howled. "I'm a coyote. Coyotes don't wear no clothes." "That'll be the day," said the cowboy. "You're no coyote. Shucks, you don't even have a tail. You're a human being." Here's the cowboy and Bill, naked as a jaybird, and the horse is even surprised. Bill turned his head to look down along his backside, and by jeepers, he didn't have a tail. He still wasn't completely convinced. After all, he was happy to be a coyote. "But I've got fleas and howl at the moon at night," Bill said. "Aw, g'wan," said the cowboy with a laugh. "Everybody knows that all Texicans got fleas and howl at the moon." Bill didn't want to believe he was no longer a coyote, but this stranger had made several good points. The cowboy was a neighborly sort, so he gave Bill the extra set of duds he kept in his saddlebag. And as soon as Bill put on these clothes, it was like he was a natural-born cowboy. It took Bill only an hour to learn how to talk. Back in those days, coyote lingo and Texican lingo were almost the same language. He had only 50 words to learn. Bill had waked up thinking he was a coyote, and by sundown he was a walking, talking cowboy. It was a pretty full day for Bill. There he is in the cowboy's duds, looking partly like a cowboy. Bill didn't waste any time and set right out across the range to find out what it was like being a cowboy. Before he got too far, he was surprised by a 42-foot-long rattlesnake sunning himself on a rock. That rattler saw Bill and figured it was lunchtime, but old Bill had another idea. "I need a rope, and now I've got one," Bill said. "It's got a rattle attached to it, too." Once he found his rope, Bill decided he needed a critter to ride. Up in the hills, he bumped into a cougar that was 2 tons bigger than any horse, and he knew he was in business. Bill jumped on the cat's back, heeled him in the ribs, and gave him a loud "Gid-ap." That cougar didn't take too kindly to his coyote cowboy passenger, but then again, the cat didn't have too much to say about it. So here's Bill with his rattlesnake rope and the cougar up above coming down at him. And then there he is, wrestling with the rattler to tell him who's boss, and down below, riding that cougar that didn't have much to say about it. Day and night, Bill rode his snarling cougar and twirled his rattlesnake rope and generally whooped it up. On the 12th day, he came across a cowboy camp. Now, Bill had worked up quite an appetite, so he made a beeline for the campfire. He swallowed a whole kettle of pork belly and beans, then he washed it down with a pot of boiling hot coffee. And when he was done, he wiped his mouth with a hunk of cactus. Never one for fancy introductions, Bill stood there looking at the cowboys and asked, "Who's the boss around here?" These cowboys, as tough and hard as they were, had never seen a buckaroo like Bill. The ugliest and meanest of those cowpokes was named Sourdough. He was so nasty all the other cowboys let him be the boss, because they didn't want to look him in the eye to tell him otherwise. Now Sourdough ambled up to Pecos, and the two of them stood face to face. "I was the boss till you showed up," said Sourdough, sweet as honey. "Partner, that was the ding-dang display I've ever seen. I reckon you're the boss man now." Here's Sourdough and Bill deciding that Bill's got to be the boss. "What do you fellers do anyway?" Bill asked. "Not much," said Sourdough. "We eat beans and we ride around a bit. Other than that, it's pretty slow around these parts." "Then what do you do with all these cows?" asked Bill. We got so many of them, we don't know what to do with them all, Sourdough said. Well, if you boys aren't dumb as dirt, said Bill, who was always thinking. Let's take these cows up to Kansas. Folks up there could use them as pets. Leastwise, it'll give us something to do. And just like that, easy as pie, Bill invented the cattle drive. They began marching those cows right up to Kansas or bust. And here they go. Sourdough and Bill and a steer and the cowboys with their eyes wide open. Riding his cougar mount on the cattle drive just wasn't working out for Bill after a while. Everybody was mighty spooked and acting like regular nervous Nellies around the cat. Bill needed a new mount, and as soon as he spotted a wild Mustang, he knew he had found his perfect riding companion. That Mustang had a history of being the most ornery critter in the West. The cowboys called him Widowmaker, since riding him was the last thing a feller did. That's just the kind of sweet little hossy I want, Bill said as he rubbed his hands together. Off Bill ran after that Mustang. No polecat's gonna ride my back, Widowmaker said in horse lingo, which of course Bill knew frontwards and backwards. As fast as Widowmaker galloped, Bill still managed to outrun him. You can imagine how this surprised the unsociable Mustang. Why don't we just team up and get it over with, so we can whoop it up together, Bill said to Widowmaker. Widowmaker gave Bill a sniff and figured that if anyone had to ride him, it might as well be a cowboy who was half coyote. After that, the two of them were quick partners. Widowmaker had dynamite in his hooves and nitroglycerin in his veins. Only one man could ride him, let alone understand him, and that was Pecos Bill. Here's Bill, still on his cougar, and seeing Widowmaker up above. There's my perfect horse, he says. In those days, cowboys weren't too good at rounding up cattle. It was up to Pecos Bill to show his cowboys how a real buckaroo worked a cattle drive. One day, a cowboy and his crew followed a stray steer to the top of a mountain and got stranded. Down on the flatlands, Bill got all the rope he could muster and lassoed his partner and the steer from the mountaintop. The other cowpunchers on the cattle drive took to the new device, and it became an important cowboy tool, especially for roping a steer by the horns. The cattle sometimes got a mite perturbed with Pecos now that the shoe was on the other hoof. One day, the biggest, most cantankerous steer decided to fix him for good. This steer, Old Blue was his name, lowered his horns, got Bill in his sights, and charged at him. When Bill got a load of what was happening, he froze Old Blue in mid-stride with his eyes. That steer was big, but he wasn't dumb. And now that Old Blue had time to think, he recognized that Bill wasn't all that bad. After Bill unfroze him, Old Blue was the best steer they had on the cattle drive. And here's Bill showing that steer who was business, who was boss. When the cattle drive got to the Rio Grande, Bill's life changed forever. Down the river came this independent little gal, stand-up riding on the back of a 53-foot catfish. Even for Texas, that was a pretty fair-sized catfish. That was the first time Bill laid eyes on Slewfoot Sue. Whoa-wee, that's the prettiest girl in the world, yipped Bill, who was reduced to a lovesick pup as soon as he saw her. I love you with all my heart, he told her. I want to make you my wife. Here's Slewfoot Sue riding the catfish. And here's Bill, all love-struck. Slewfoot Sue was flattered. The idea of spending the rest of her days with a prospect like Pecos Bill was mighty appealing. I'll be honored to be your lawful wife, Sue told Bill. Why don't you finish this here cattle drive, and I'll meet you in Kansas when you're done. And then we can get married and live happily ever after, said Bill. The lovebirds parted ways, Sue riding her catfish down the Rio Grande, and Bill heading north with a cattle drive. Bill pushed on with vengeance. The trail was dusty, the sun was scorching, The days were long, and that was the good part. Here they are, promising to meet later. And here is Bill riding that cattle drive with a vengeance. Every night when the sun went down, all the cowboys would gather around the campfire to whittle and play cards. Bill would tuck the cattle into bed, and then he'd wander off to a high ridge to howl at the moon. Here are the cowboys playing cards. And there's Bill sitting on his stump howling at the moon. That's what he did every night. For 5 months, the cattle drive pushed on until finally Bill and his cowboys were less than a day's ride from the Kansas border. It was time to celebrate. The end of the drive was near. Bill gave the fellers the rest of the day off, and they held a hootenanny with singing and dancing. They were having a foot-stomping good time when, right in the middle of a do-si-do, the biggest cyclone ever seen in the West darkened the horizon. A cyclone is a tornado, kids, and here it is, coming around with animals and people in it, all kinds of stuff. The twister, swirling around at 500 miles an hour and sucking up everything in its path, was heading right toward the cattle. Bill knew in his bones he had to do something. He threw his lariat and lassoed the cyclone by the neck. Widowmaker and Bill tried with all their might to pull it down, but this was no ordinary tornado. The cyclone snapped its head forward, and Bill shot off Widowmaker. He hung onto the rope and dug his heels into the planes to get the twister under control, but there was nothing doing. The cyclone stopped short, and the backlash yanked Bill smack onto his back. "All right, you big bag of wind," hollered Bill. "Show me what you can do." Yee-haw! Bill had the ride of his life on that twister. The two of them bucked and rolled and clawed so hard they dug out the Grand Canyon. Here he is on Widowmaker, lassoing that twister. And here he goes riding that cyclone and digging out the whole Grand Canyon. Now this is the story, you see, this is the legend. But Bill tried to knock out the cyclone by riding it into a mountain, but the twister just ripped off the mountaintop and rode on through. The cyclone spun faster and faster to try to get Bill to loosen his grip. Fat chance. All that cyclone ended up doing was fanning the lakes dry. Now that made Bill mad. He pulled so tight with his rope that he made the cyclone cry. That twister bawled so hard its tears welled up and made the Great Salt Lake. Out onto the Gulf of Mexico the twister went, tail dancing across the water like a king salmon. Bill gave a crank and the twister rolled on its back, crazier than a bronc on locoweed, scraping the land flat. Folks called that spot Death Valley from then on, because nothing ever lived there after Bill and his twister were done with it. But Bill hung on, and they went back and forth like that for 10 full days, until Bill finally managed to steer the twister up toward the heavens. Up and up they went, riding through the clouds, up and up. And here he is, riding that twister up and up. Well, that was the last anybody ever heard of Bill. The cowboys got the cattle drive to Kansas, and from then on, cowboys always made cattle drives, just the way Bill taught them. Now don't you go feeling sorry for Bill. He would have laughed at you for being so sentimental. After all, Bill isn't really gone. If you go out to West Texas, you can still see Bill if you try hard enough. Listen to the wind, and when it starts to howl like a coyote, look high up in the sky. I guarantee you that Pecos Bill and Slewfoot Sue will be there, riding Widowmaker across the heavens, jumping from cloud to cloud. And here are some of Bill's friends watching, looking up into the clouds. And there are Bill and Slewfoot Sue and Widowmaker up high in the clouds. I hope you can see that. So that is the legend of Pecos Bill, that he created the Grand Canyon and the desert out west and all kinds of big landmarks that now you can go see out there and you can say, I know how that happened. That was Pecos Bill riding the cyclone. So it was good to read to you kids. I hope you enjoyed the story. I hope you all stay well, and I look forward to seeing you sometime soon. Bye-bye.